Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome along to this AHDB webinar, Weed Management for Potato Crops, with myself, David Wilson. A lot of you won't know me. I'm the Knowledge Exchange Manager for AHDB Potatoes for East Anglia in the southeast. Along on this call, I've got my colleagues Joe Martin and Harry Henderson. And we have the Spot East host, Mike Shapland from James Foskett Farms. And we have a virtual Graham Tomalin on the call, who hopefully will be joining us later. So my housekeeping, first of all, you can only be able to hear myself at the moment. You're all muted at the moment. You're unable to speak, just to keep things flowing nicely. However, we would like as many questions as possible. That there is a question function on the bar at the side of the screen here. So please do ask your questions as you go along. We'll have time for a Q&A at the end. So it'd be great if you can pop questions in when they're fresh in your mind, and then we can address these later on. With regards to time, this is planned in for an hour and a half. We've hopefully got just over an hour's worth of content, leaving us a good 20 to 30 minutes for questions at the end. So please do ask questions as you go along. There's 3 handouts on that tab at the side, as I say, for some of the stuff covered today. So feel free to download those as we go through today's presentation. You might find them useful. There are some basis points available for today's presentation. The easiest way to get these is in the questions box at the side of the screen. If you can just put your basis number in there, and my colleague Christian behind the scenes will acknowledge you're there and can add you to the list, and you can get virtual points for being on there. This webinar is being recorded. So if there's bits you want to come back to, don't worry about scribbling notes. It will be sent round to everyone afterwards, so you can catch up with what you've missed. We've got a couple of polls coming up that we're just going to run through just now. But if you'd like to interact with us on social media, there's the handles there, AHDB Potatoes and hashtag Strategic Farm, as we will be introducing the new Spot East. So the next 90 minutes, we're going to kick things off with a digital video introduction to Spot East. Mike Shapland, Farm Manager for James Foskett Farms, is on the call just now and will be available at the end for the Q&A. Bit about the business and what we've got happening there this year. Then hand over to my colleague Joe Martin, the Senior Scientist for Crop Protection and Weeds within AHDB. He's going to do a background to weeds in the potato rotation. Then we go digital again with a virtual look-see at the 2020 demonstration herbicide trial we've got at James Foskett Farms, where we have Mike and Graham Tomalin in a virtual sense. After that, we'll follow up with Harry Henderson, the Knowledge Exchange Technical Manager for Arable, covering some best practice application advice around weed control. And then we're going to finish things off with Joe again with some of the tools we've got for the future coming through AHDB, and then finally a quick Q&A. So I'm going to hand over controls now to my colleague Christian for some polls we've got coming up. It should be popping up on the screen. So this is just a bit of scene setting for you really, but it's really, has your weed control been more difficult this year? This isn't regards to anything particular, just the season. So if you click on the screen, either yes, no, or no difference, we'll give it 20 seconds or so, and then we'll come to the results. Yeah, so that's quite a resounding yes there, for reasons no doubt we will come on to throughout this webinar. So if we move on to the next question, Christian. And this is more specifically around changes of products. So have you seen more crop damage from your contact herbicides this year than in previous years? Again, yes, no, or no difference. So yeah, majority saying no difference, no, and then yes in last place. So there we go. I believe there's one final poll question.
Just the 2 polls for this one.
Just the 2.
So,
perfect, right. Well, as you're I will hand over to Christian now to introduce the videos, just so everyone can see them, hopefully. I will catch you on the other side.
Yep, so there should be a video playing in a second. If you can't view it, try not viewing the window in full screen, because I think the video sometimes pops up as a second window. If you can't view or hear anything, just pop in the questions box if you'd like me to send you the video after this, so I can show it afterwards. But we're about to start the video now.
I'm Mike Shapland. I'm the farm manager for James Foskett Farms, and we're based just north of Woodbridge in East Suffolk. We crop about 1,300 hectares annually, and that's up and down the East Suffolk coast predominantly. So we're cropping light sandy loam, so about 400 hectares of potatoes grown annually, and then we're also growing sugar beet, combinable crops and vining peas, and in addition to that we have 200 hectares of organic land across 4 sites, and we're growing a range of different organic vegetables as well. On the potato side of the business, then predominantly we're growing pre-packed potatoes for packing customers, supplying UK multiple supermarket retailers. In addition to that, we grow about 70 hectares of certified seed, some of which comes back into our own business, but some is marketed outside the business. In terms of organic vegetables, then that's to a range of customers, so multiple retailers, but also the box schemes, organic box schemes are major customers of ours. We offered to become the Spot East host last season, and really the drive behind that was we'd seen some of the really good work that Elvedon and Andrew and his team had done over the previous years, and thought that it was a very worthwhile and very scientifically grounded but also industry usable way of trialling relevant information for potatoes. So we were keen to take that on. I think, being fairly selfish, we were keen to have trials information based on our own crops and our own soils in our own fields. We're just in the infancy, and obviously coronavirus has scuppered our plans in terms of being able to bring people here. What my ambitions for it really are to base it on really good sound scientific trials, but also to make as much of it demonstrable as possible, so that when people come out they can really, have a look, and hopefully that'll stimulate some debate and some challenge and give people some ideas, and that's my main targets for it really. And the other thing is, with it being a long-term project, is it gives us the opportunity to look at some of the longer-term rotational challenges of growing potatoes, particularly things like soil-borne pests, wireworm, potato cyst nematode. We're in an area here that's been growing potatoes quite intensively for a long period, and managing those pests in a longer-term, more integrated way is something that's going to be real advantage for us to look at within Spot Farm. So potato weed control really is based around trying to control a range of broadleaf weeds, which are our predominant problems, if you like. So lots of polygnums, but also fumitory and groundsel can be quite issues for us. Grass weeds to an extent as well, so volunteer cereals, small patches of black grass, some wild oats and some ryegrass as well. So strategy is really based around use of residual products, and then a separate application now of a PPO, so either Gozai or Shark, which is timed for just immediately prior to emergence. Lack of moisture is always an issue, and activation of residual herbicides has been a challenge this spring in particular, because we've had a very dry time since the weather changed in March. So activation of those residuals is probably one of our biggest challenges, and occasionally we are having to follow up with Titus rimsulfuron to take out some of the issues that they're getting through the residual base. What's quite beneficial is that certainly the desiccation trial and some of the herbicide work is repeated on a national basis on different sites, so that's particularly useful to feed in, an overall large amount of data to give, treatment results and validation, but also it gives good local information, if you like, or regional information for growers there, because obviously desiccation is a different task in Scotland as it is to the east of England. And also I think it's a nice way of trying to put a little back into the industry, and also an opportunity to get other growers onto farm. And I think the opportunity to speak to growers and to receive ideas from other growers is always fertile, to be honest.
That was a quick look-see into Spot East going forward. So Mike will be on hand for a Q&A later on at the end of this webinar. But we'll now hand over to my colleague Joe Martin for his presentation about background to weeds in the potato rotation.
Okay, so hopefully everyone can see my screen and the first slide. So what I hope to try and do over the next sort of 15-20 minutes or so is just talk a little bit about sort of weed management in potatoes and some of the challenges that are faced. And then some of the sort of solutions and options that we've got that growers are able to use and to think about IPM, etc. for the future. So in terms of broadleaf weeds, and it's interesting, Mark was saying that it's broadleaf weeds that are one of the biggest issues, and that certainly is often the case for potato production. And we know that it can reduce quality and yield within a potato crop by over 30% if you don't get good weed control. Getting that crop cover as fast as possible, reducing that weed competition is quite important at the early growth stages, as well as at the end of the growing period when the canopy starts to open up as well. Sort of weeds such as cleavers, bindweeds can grow through crops, fat hen, oilseed rape, creeping thistle in particular can be a tricky one to try and control, and obviously they're all competing for nutrients, light and water as well. So, and we know broadleaf weeds can be more tricky to control. Most growers are largely dependent on herbicides to actually maintain that level of control currently. Before the actual crop itself, then control of broadleaf weeds needs to sort of think about within the rotation, particularly those problematic perennial weeds such as thistle, because there's such few control options within potatoes. So if you can get those controlled in a different crop, then that often helps. And we know rotation for potatoes is often determined by PCN rather than weed issues. So, different things impact in how you can manage your potato herbicides effectively. Methods such as re-ridging or hoeing, if that's suitable, if you've got good environmental conditions, can be an effective way of controlling many broadleaf weeds as well at that early growth stage. Maximising herbicide efficacy, yeah, I mean that is something that Mark was mentioning earlier, and certainly this year where weather conditions have been very dry, getting that preems on at a good time and good moisture levels to make sure that you get those the better level of efficacy. Certainly sort of residuals that are commonly used include clomazone, flufenicet, metribromuron, metribuzin, pendimethalin, and prosulfocarb. And yeah, they all need to conditions to get that good level of control. And the post-stem timing as well is critical, and we'll see the work that we carried out on Spot Farm last year looking at shark as a replacement for dicot. Getting that timing right is quite important too. Just thinking about some of the problems that growers may have, and certainly we're all aware of ALS herbicide resistance, which tends to be more prevalent in cereal crops. And often people do say that using a potato crop can be beneficial in helping in terms of that resistance management strategy, because we've only got one ALS herbicide in for potato control. So using rimsulfuron, you do need to be careful because you could be adding to that ALS herbicide resistance pressure. And if we sort of think about resistance, moving on, you'll see on the graph on the right the number of unique resistance cases for a number of different countries that have increased. And if I just click again, you'll see the level of unique resistance cases that have come up in the UK. And we're aware with high levels of metribuzin use that this could also increase resistance to that mode of action for things like meadowgrass, fat hen, and groundsel. Now, if you want more information on sort of resistance and what to look for, then the Weed Resistance Action Group has a website, and they recently put out thinking about how to do testing and getting your weeds tested, because actually knowing whether or not you've got that sort of problem and getting it tested is really important to help you to start manage those issues. Some of the key resistant weeds within the UK, so things like mayweed, chickweed and poppy are all causing problems. And looking at these maps, there's some of the areas where the ALS resistant broadleaf weed distribution occurs. So quite sort of geographically spread around the UK, and we can see it increasing in many cases. And like I mentioned earlier, things like metribuzin, metamitron in broadleaf weed crops that are where they're heavily used, then we need to be careful that that we're not driving resistance further as well. So like I say, it's sort of getting things tested if you're seeing things that aren't getting the control that you would normally achieve with the products that you're using, and thinking about issues and cultural methods that you can do to help maybe use that chemistry wherever possible. Another area of concern is glyphosate, and there are some clear guidelines to try and make sure that the stewardship for glyphosate is maintained, and we want to really make sure that risk of glyphosate resistance, as we do know it's elsewhere in the world, so no more than 2 applications for stubbles, making sure you're using the sufficient rate for the right growth stage of the weed to make sure, again, giving you the best efficacy, and just taking care when you're using non-label adjuvants so that you're not affecting control levels. And again, there's a really nice fact sheet there, which you can get off the AHDB website, where it gives some clear messages and information if you want more information on that. We move on to IPM. So we've talked about herbicide resistance, but there's other reasons why we really need to be thinking far more about integrated pest management or integrated weed management. As I'm sure you're all aware, regulation, so we're seeing loss of active ingredients on a regular basis. There's just a few there that are being mentioned where we're losing those. And so those tools are no longer in the toolbox, and it's thinking what else might be available to do, and that's where IPM is so important. Brexit, with regulation shifting away from Europe and back more to the UK, then it's trying to understand how that may or may not impact on the future. Mentioned resistance already, so I don't need to go back over that. And lack of new products. It costs a huge amount of money for a new crop protection product to come through the regulatory process. And we're just not seeing those coming through as much as we used to. Where we see an increase, though, is with bioprotectants or biopesticides, and their numbers of those that are being registered each year is going up and up, and we need to start to understand how we can use those better in outdoor production systems as well to help with the loss of the conventional chemistry. So in terms, and obviously public perception and NGO activity, which is often very high and is very anti-use of conventional chemistry in many cases, often through education and that side of things that potentially needs to be looked at for the future. So moving a bit more in terms of IPM. So what is IPM? And I know a lot of growers are probably already doing some parts of IPM, but it's about that whole integrated approach that is needed to discourage the development of weed, pest and diseases using integrated measures wherever possible. And it's certainly something at AHDB that we're very much focusing on at the moment. there's all sorts of different models and diagrams that you can find for IPM. This is just one that the IBMA have produced, and it's the IPM pyramid. And what you'll see is that chemical control, it's still there, but it should be the last thing that you think about, that you work from the bottom up with this approach. So it's thinking about rotation, it's thinking about varieties, it's thinking about a whole range of enhancement of beneficials, and then it's that real monitoring, forecasting, warning systems. So that's where things like your resistance management and checking and getting your seeds and your plants tested if there's issues. And then it's moving on to things such as mechanical or physical control methods, as I mentioned earlier. That re-ridging of potatoes might be able to help if you've got the good environmental conditions to do that. Moving on up to biological control, and then if you need to, then using chemical control. So IPM and the future, we do see that there should be reduced use of conventional chemistry. And if we look at the, so at AHDB, we track actives, both in terms of when their renewal date is in the registration process, and also what possible classifications there may be assigned to each active. As you can see, so we traffic light, so red being the ones that we most concerned about, and there may be potential for loss, down to sort of the green, which we've got more of a positive feel about them for the future. So you can see there's a number of potato herbicide products there that we don't know how long we may have. So again, it's about taking care of those products while we've got them, and using good stewardship and good management of them. Part of the work that we carried out in 2019 was a large piece of weed review work that was commissioned by AHDB in conjunction with BBRO. So RSK ADAS did this for us, working with a number of other organisations and manufacturers and distribution, to try and look at the state of where we are currently with weed control across a whole number of different crops. What system there may be in place coming already or for the future. And one of the things that that they came up with was that it's about thinking about how to control weeds at each stage of its development. So thinking about that weed cycle. So it's, you know, starting with sort of depleting the seed bank that you've got there already, then moving on to try and get the control at the sort of small weed seedling stage wherever possible, because obviously after that, if you're getting to seed set, then that can be more difficult to do, and preventing that seed return is often difficult as well. And they used a number of they've got a number of different areas that could be looked at for the future, including things such as bioherbicides, genetics, monitoring, chemical and non-chemical control. You know, so a whole range of different techniques that could be used to help growers and to make sure that we're getting good weed management across a range of different situations. That weed review is on the AHDB website, so have a look if you want more information on that. Last year, across 4 of the spot farms, we carried out a number of weed control trials. These were 2 types. So we had a residual herbicide trial, where we were looking at a clonophen or emerger that gained approval for use in the UK at 1.75 litres back last year. And we wanted to look at that in range with a number of other available residual herbicides to see how it would fit within that kind of programme, as well as looking at any crop damage. And then we also wanted to look at, for weed control, the use of a PPO, or say such as Shark or Gozai, in replacing dicot, and again thinking about the safety and the timings of when you could apply it. So dicot, I think you can apply, or you could apply up to 40% emergence, but both shark or gozai is 10% emergence. So it was really, we really wanted to see how far we could push it. So these is just a quick table of the results from the residual herbicides at the North trial. And Emerger applied alone gave good partial control of some of the weeds, but not quite commercially acceptable, which was the feedback we got when we carried out a number of open days for growers. But what we did find is that it works as a good tank mix partner, and some of those products that it was tested with, it gave really good levels of control, and we got no damage at all. However, at this site at Spot North, the best treatment that growers felt from the demonstrations days was the shot put and Praxim, which is possibly because of the weed species that were present at the site at that time. Now, one of the so treatment 8 was quite an expensive mix. So in the next table, you'll see we managed to get data on sort of costs of those products, and it does vary depending on what you pick. But yeah, certainly that three-way mix was deemed as far too expensive at that point. But some of the other mixes were sort of at comparable costings, we felt. So in summary, no crop damage observed from the Emerger. Emerger gave good levels of control, which were improved when tank mixed, and it's showing to be an effective partner. And again, you just need to think about costs and think about the weed spectrum that you've got when you're picking the chemicals of choice. The other, so the dicot replacement trial. So this is some photos from the Spot Southwest site where we looked at 2 varieties, Lenormand and Georgina, and we applied product, so both dicot or shark at pre-emergence, 10% emergence, and you'll see on the next slide at 50% emergence, and obviously we had some untreated. The Lenormand was particularly affected at 50%, not just by the dicot, but also by the shark. However, the haulm did recover towards the end of the trial, but when we yielded the trial, and we took some sort of hand plot digs, what we found was that the Lenormand was particularly affected in terms of tuber growth and development at that 50% rate, and therefore the label is set at 10% for a reason, and we would only say that we could recommend using label rates. So it's really important that we stick to that 10%, and it can be quite tricky. I mean, we all know potatoes, especially if it's warm and good conditions, that they'll come through very quickly. So it can be quite easy to miss that 10% emergence timing. So I hope that's given you a bit of a feel for some of the stuff that we've been doing within AHDB and some of the challenges and points that you can go and delve into a bit more detail if there's interest within those areas. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. That was really useful insight into what's gone before and actually sets us up quite nicely for the next video. It's currently thundering in central South Suffolk, so we're going to head across to East Suffolk, where hopefully it's a bit brighter and warmer. But we're also going to have a look at this year to build on that. We did the same again, looking at the contacts. You'll see once again it's in Lenormand, and this is just a look-see at the current stage of it. We will take this trial to yield and we'll be able to feed back later in the season with the results.
I'm Graham Tomalin, I'm an agronomist, advise James Foskett Farms. Planting went well despite a wet winter. We thought we were going to have a really difficult planting, but after the first 10 days, planting went really well. But we've been left with very dry soils, which for pre-packed potatoes where we're trying to wet up now for scab control, in these dry conditions we're taking 2 applications of water, which is using valuable resource that we need for the crop going through the whole season. Herbicide residuals have been a little bit poorer this season, principally because it's been so dry, and the soils, particularly the soils I work on, are sandy soils, and in the dry conditions the herbicides don't form a seal, the residuals, so weeds will get through, and we're certainly seeing that at the moment. This season with potatoes we've got a mixture of work, but some of the work on the spot farm site, we're looking at herbicides, in particular contact herbicides, and we're also looking at virus reduction.
Historically, where we've had Diquat available to us as a total herbicide, then we had the opportunity to make that application up until really about 40% crop emergence without significantly affecting crop development and ultimate yield. Now, in the absence of Diquat, then we're using other products, PPO products, which are pretty effective, but they are harsher on the crop. So we need to be at 10% emergence really as a latest point of application. So obviously that's given us some challenges in terms of sprayer workload, particularly if we're separating that PPO application from residual application, and timings need to be that much more critical really. So far we've been able to do that. We've had opportunities this year, but there's been no issues in terms of being able to travel. But yeah, it does put greater pressure on sprayer workload for sure. Good crop observation as well. I mean, making sure that you're in the fields and really timing that well, because on a warm, light, sandy soils, we can move from no emergence to sort of 20 or 30% emergence within 48 hours sometimes. So we need to be on the ball to make sure we don't miss those opportunities really.
Well, herbicides have undergone major changes over the last few years. I was involved with the previous Spotty site where we were looking at residual replacements, and now we've lost our most recent loss of chemistry was a contact herbicide, Diquat Retro, and now we're looking at the options to replace Diquat. This was a demonstration plot that we had here rather than an actual replicated trial, but we were just trying to demonstrate that compared to the previous chemistry, Diquat, the new options, which are Gozai and Shark, which are both PPO inhibitors, are much harsher on emerged potatoes. So what we've done is spray the trial pre-emergence at 10% emergence and 80% emergence. And what you could see from the trial or the demonstration is much more significant damage on the later applications.
So directly behind me is the herbicide trial, and then to your left, where the white canes are, is a desiccation trial. So that'll come in towards the end of the season, where we'll look at different techniques for desiccating crop, because the use of Diquat was very widespread in that process as well. So we've now obviously got a limited choice of products, but the PPO products are very important within that. But also there are other techniques that are being looked at in terms of horn pulling and potentially applications of salt and that sort of thing. So that'll look at different techniques and also skin set as a result of those techniques.
We'll just highlight to growers when and where we should and shouldn't use these products and what the limits are with these products. But this is to just demonstrate the importance of timing to the growers, and what we'll see from the demonstration plots as we go forward from here is how much effect that has on the growth of the crop and then potentially the yield going forward. You know, we always talk about trying to get 2 weeks extra growth at the end of the season, but what we're doing by burning the crop off too late, then we're actually losing crop growth at the start of the season.
We've got a crop of Lenormand, which is a white potato grown for the baking market, for the supermarket, so on pretty light sandy loam soil. And you can see in the background the herbicide trial where we've looked at different timings of PPO applications and different PPO applications and combinations, and you can probably pick out the differences in crop development a little bit and the effects of some of those later timings of those PPO products.
For growers, traditionally it's always been a one application herbicide just prior to emergence. It means the timing of that herbicide is much more critical. So some might move to a two-stage application with residuals earlier and then follow up at emergence, just to mean so that they're not quite so time critical on that application as they're just about to emerge. On other trials we're working on the spot program this year, we're looking at a virus reduction, and this trial aimed at seed production, which James Foskett Farms is involved with seed potato production. So we're looking at various different combinations of a new chemistry, adjuvants, and also looking at oils in terms of can we reduce the virus transmission into seed using these alongside current insecticides that we've got.
Welcome back, everyone. Yeah, that was a look-see into some of the work going on at Spot East this year. Just a reminder that if you have any questions about what you've seen, feel free to type them in now. I see some people have been putting some basis numbers in as well, so a reminder of that. If you want your basis numbers, add them into the questions, and my colleague Christian will deal with that. We'll have the Q&A at the end. So I will now, without further ado, hand over to my colleague Harry Henderson just to run through some best practice application advice with regards to these herbicides.
Okay, thanks, David. Yes, so I thought I'd just review a little bit of sprayer technology in 2 slides for the next 5 or 10 minutes. And something that I thought I'd just raise as a point of interest really was this trail sprayer that you can see on your slide. We trialed at the Shropshire Spot Farm, and the idea was that it would it's a Danfoil sprayer. It's a Danfoil design, and it's an air shear sprayer which will dramatically reduce the water rate of your applications, to the point where if you're in a cereal situation, you could lower the water rate to just 30 litres a hectare. So you're getting 100 hectare capacity, sorry, out of a 3,000 litre tank, which is some going. We looked with water sensitive paper in a potato crop that you can see behind the sprayer there. Attached water sensitive paper, set the rate to 60 litres per hectare. And you know, the patination was good, the penetration was ideal, the capacity of the sprayer to get product onto the leaf in a blight spray was absolutely fine. But 60 litres a hectare, and that sends the ag chem manufacturers and the agronomists shuddering to their core, worrying whether that's an acceptable practice. So it's an interesting concept. The Danfoil system you've most likely heard of has been around for quite a few years, and this machine's still in Shropshire doing some good work. But for a relatively lightweight machine, pulled by a 140 horsepower tractor, it can go out for the day on a tank full of 3,000 litres of water and be pretty effective. The other interesting point for this machine was it was an injection sprayer, so I think it could have up to 6 different chemicals being injected into the water flow as it travelled to the spray boom as you go. So you don't necessarily need water in the main spray tank. That can be just simply fresh water, and you add the herbicides as you go, the fungicides as you go. Interesting concept. I'd say really that it will be on the back boiler. If you think of a herbicide such as shark, its minimum water rate is 200 litres, and I would suggest that it's the labelled recommendations probably overrule the need to lower the rates to that level. The next sprayer you can see here is the Horschlieb PT, 8,000 litre tank, and at 200 litres a hectare, you've got 40 hectares worth of chemical in that 40 hectares worth of work in that tank. So similar capacity to the Danfoil, apart from it's much heavier. You're carrying 8,000 litres of water. So different technologies, different capacities, but overall, I think it's the label recommendations and your agronomy recommendations that need to be the first in the queue here, really. We can go on to the next slide, please. And so we did some workshops on getting the best out of the sprayer, and one of the first ones that came up was operator training and aptitude, and that's absolutely key to getting the best out of the spray nozzles, the sprayer, and the herbicide being applied. If the dealer offers clinics and workshops, get your operator to go along. There's always something that you can learn and you can pick up. If the agronomy company offers clinics and workshops for sprayer operators, absolutely the same thing. Get your operators along to those, and it's always a good thing to keep people up to date. There's some great technology out there. Individual nozzle switching really reduces the amount of overlap, is very accurate in its switching. There's the technology now to record exactly what you've put on and where, and the weather conditions can go into that record as well. And there's even sprayer mounted weather stations that can measure your dew point and your leaf wetness as you go and decide when the weather's getting a little bit more catchy. As I've said, there's many routes to capacity. The one thing I haven't mentioned at the minute is a Bowser. And yes, you might have a 3,000 litre tank, and you might think that you need that 8,000 litre tank, but as my next point leads to, it all adds up to weight. So if you can add a Bowser, that dramatically increases the capacity of your sprayer. If you want to put 250, 300 litres of water on, spray liquid on per hectare, then a Bowser will certainly help. And even if you have to put another operator on to ferry the Bowser about, it can be well worth it to get the most out of your sprayer. The 8,000 litre sprayer is fine, but it can turn into a very expensive water Bowser if you're putting a lot of road work in, ferrying water from your farm site to the field. Some of the other work we've done is getting a sprayer right for the business, and it's quite simple to do, really. Consider your biggest spray job and your time window. So have you got 300 hectares and you need to get that done in 2 days, and what is your speed? And generally, despite all modern sprayer advances, boom suspension, chassis suspension, and so on, the nozzle speed tends still to be about 12 to 14 kilometers per hour, even though the sprayer feels like it could do a lot more, pushing on 16, 18k. The nozzle probably will best perform at about 14 kph. And so you can use those three things to really calculate the size of your boom needed, and the field efficiency of your sprayer. So how much time when you're in your sprayer are you spraying with the master switch on, and how much time are you going back to the yard to fill up? And that can be calculated on the AHDB calculator tools that are on the website at the moment. Costing the size of your investment. Do you need that 8,000 litre sprayer? Can you get away with a 3,000 litre machine, which is much lighter? And can you support it with a Bowser when you need that extra output? That's something that you can cost out as well on our HDB website. And sprayer filling area, we've done some work really with cereals and oilseeds, where you can cost out and research many different types of biobed facilities, chemical washing plants, sentinel units, and so on. And we've done some work into that, and that's available on the HDB website. There's still plenty of sprayer filling areas that are not really up to spec, and the environment engineer are well aware that this is the greatest source of potential pollutant, is the foil caps getting spilt or dropped on the floor is usually the greatest source of any contamination. So just make sure that your spray filling area is up to spec, or you've got an inflatable spray washing tray, or a tray that you can slide underneath. Angling Water, in fact, will give you one for free if you're in their catchment area. So that was just really a top up from me from what we've been doing with sprayer technology from the AHDB. So back over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Harry. I'm not sure if you've got internet issues or just had a misspent youth in the SAS, but your face was slightly blurry for that. I prefer the SAS version, better story.
I'm in the middle of a thunderstorm, which might not be helping.
No worries. No, thank you very much for that. Yeah, apologies to all for the fast pace of all the content. Some great content coming from our speakers. So please do encourage you to put questions in the questions section on the side. We've got quite a few coming through already, and we'll endeavour to answer as many as possible. So in the interest of time, to allow time for these questions, I will now like to hand back over to Joe Martin, who's just going to round things up with some of the tools we've got for the future going forward.
Thanks, David. So yeah, hopefully you can see the screen again. So what I hope to do with this bit is just to show you some of the new technology, some of it already out there on farm, being used not necessarily in potatoes, but in other cropping situations, and some development of some of the technology that that is coming and maybe being used elsewhere in the world. So first of all, we're going to talk about the iSpot project. This is something that AHDB Horticulture funded, and the project finished back in 2019. And it was work looking at precision of glyphosate droplets for weed control within brassica and allium crops. So the picture on the right is a prototype of the robot, and the weeding spray underneath would target specific droplets at the weeds when the camera technology spotted that it wasn't a crop. So the aim of this was to use less herbicides, reduce runoff, avoid any residues. Obviously, you're not spraying any of the crop, and eliminating spray drift. So this just shows just some pictures of sort of the weed levels that were in the trial at the time. So you've got the weedy untreated plot on the far left. And then weed free, so that was hand weeded. The standard pre-emergence products that were applied, which I think was pendimethalin at the time, and then the droplet application. So this had 3 applied 2, 4, and 5 weeks after planting. After that, the crop had grown sufficiently to outcompete weeds and giving pretty much 100% ground cover.
Sorry, Joe, could you repeat that bit? You cut out slightly.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. It's got a bit thundery here, so I apologise if I do cut out. So yeah, so the glyphosate droplets were manually applied 2, 4, and 5 weeks after planting, and after that, the crop had grown sufficiently big enough to give really good ground cover and outcompete any further weeds that were potentially coming through. So with brassicas that was quite successful, but when they looked at it for alliums, it was a bit more difficult because of the lack of competitive nature of leeks and when they're first growing. This graph here just gives you sort of a different view in terms of the percentage control that we were observed. So you've got the standard treatments on the conventional sprays, and then the droplet treatments. So we've got one timing, applied twice, applied 3 times, and then an adjusted system as well there. And then they also used glufosinate as an alternative, because obviously glyphosate, who knows what how that will happen in the next few years, but they wanted to see whether or not you could put other products through their system. So in summary, the work, yeah, it worked. It gave really good satisfactory control of weeds. They can use a range of different products if need be. And it did reduce herbicide inputs quite significantly, specifically, I mean, 97% reduction for cabbages. And they're predicting that it may be profitable, and as profitable using this method as conventional spraying. Now they're currently still developing this piece of kit, and we're looking to see how it will move forward for the future. But there was talk of whether or not we would need to put it onto a robot, or whether or not it could potentially be mounted on a tractor-based system if you were going through the crop anyway. So it's something to look out for in the future. Just thinking about other potential techniques, so I did a bit of a pull of different other methods for weed control. So we've got things like the garford hoe, where you can actually do inter-row and between the different plants, as you can see here from these photos. And we do see precision application as being quite key for the future. So applying to the weed, not to the crop, applying less herbicide, and it's understanding how the regulation of that may help to actually drive that further forward for the future. I mean, you can see in the top, the guided and a boom sprayer, where it's actually just spraying in between the rows of the cereals. So obviously you need some really good technology to make sure that you're not hitting the crop, but it's useful stuff that we do see coming through, and in certain places it's already available. Burners, some burners have been around for a long time, and yeah, they can be economically expensive to use, but we see them as potential. We see foam weeding. Foam weeding is something that is used in amenity, so maybe potential there. And then in terms of electric weeding, so we know of at least 2 companies now that consider this use. So in the UK, we've got Ubiquitech or Rootwave, where they have an amenity-based product that's already on the market, and there are trials ongoing looking at more commercial-based. Last year, they were looking at weed control in blackcurrant production, so quite useful there. And Zazo, so based in Germany, have been looking at this, and certainly one of their first targets that they were considering was potato desiccation. So again, it's we keep an eye on where this technology is coming through, and try to get sort of up-to-date information where we can. And then obviously robotics seems to be the one of the things that is ever at arm's length coming through. But we do know of one system on the bottom right, sort of Neo technology, a robot based from Australia, and this one's called Oz, and they can use spiked harrows for weed.
We might have briefly lost Joe there. Are you there, David?
Yeah, I think we might have done. I wasn't sure if it was my end or his end.
I'd say if we want to, we've got a few questions coming in, so if we want to move on to the Q&A, and if Joe comes back, we can nip back to that after a few questions if you want.
Yeah, so if I could ask the remainder of the panelists, Harry and Mike, to possibly pop on your cameras and microphones. And if I...
Hello.
There, can you see me, Harry?
I can indeed.
And Mike, are you with us?
I am, yes.
Perfect. Well, so first question for you, Mike, just to follow up on what Joe teases with there. Mention of a green burner. Obviously, you have an organic part of the business as well. How does the green burner fit in your organic herbicide system or weed control system?
So on organic potatoes, we use the green burner as a total sort of weed control strategy just around peri-emergence. So normally just at the point which the crop is coming through. Quite a few of our organic potatoes are fleeced as well, so we remove the fleece at that point, and then green burn at that stage to kill everything as much as possible as emerged. And then it obviously fits into desiccation as well at the tail end of the season. Following a flail as an independent operation, we then green burn to desiccate at that stage.
And then with regards to costs, obviously, Joe in his earlier presentation showed us some of the combined tank mix costs for some of these herbicide options up to £117 a hectare, I think was the dearest. Where would a green burner rank in that cost?
So about the top end of that, really. So sort of taking into account sort of average work rate, we think it costs us about £110 per hectare on average for a green burn pass with current gas prices. So yeah, and sort of average work rates, that's a forward speed of about 5 kph.
Right. And do you use it at all in the conventional system or purely in the organics?
We haven't used it in the conventional system at the moment. Obviously, it's a more expensive solution than what we're doing currently, and also it's you're burning a lot of energy as well, which needs to be taken into consideration. And the other factor really is a conflict of workload. So it's quite a widely used piece of equipment in the organic side of the business, and we're using it on pretty much all of the organic cropping that we're doing. So it's a bit of kit that's in demand quite a bit, really. So at the moment we probably don't have capacity scope to use it broadly across the conventional potatoes within the business.
Perfect. I think Joe is back in now. So a question that's come in, well, it's more of a statement, but for Harry, and Joe might want to interject as well, just clarification around the legal part of the label with water volumes. Throw that to you, Harry.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I mean, you can't leave the legal requirements of the label. So if it's 200 litres, it's 200 litres. Is that technology, the downfall technology, going to lead to a change? I don't think so. I think we are wedded to conventional muzzle technology, and if it's 200 litres, it needs to be 200 litres as per the label. Simply lowering the water rate to get more capacity out of your sprayer and risking not getting what you need done by a herbicide or fungicides, it just doesn't stack up. So yeah, label recommendations every time.
And Joe, do you have anything to add there from a sort of regulatory point of view within the crop protection team?
Yeah, I mean, the label recommendation, or the label is there, and that is the legal advice that growers should be following, whether it be rate of product, timing of product, or water volume. So yeah, we can only say that you should be following the label.
Yeah.
Right. So actually, worth mentioning that unfortunately Graham Tomalin is extremely busy this afternoon. He's been held up, so we can get questions to him, which may not get the answers just now. But one that I might actually throw back to Mike Shapland, if I may, as you will have seen the trial more than the rest of us, and that's with dicot gone. This individuals having more problems with fumitory, using shark at 10% emergence, but it didn't seem to touch it. A merger does a good job. Have you found anything in this particular trial? And the same for you, Joe, for previous years. Has a merger done a better job than shark at 10% on fumitory?
Sorry,
in terms of,
after you, Joe.
Sorry. In terms of, I haven't seen how well Emerger does on fumitory, but Recently, I was in funnily enough, in an asparagus crop that had huge fumitory issues. Now, we did see that Artist gave some really good control of the fumitory. So I don't know if that would be a solution that might be possible.
Yeah, so for your benefit, Mike, it was just fumitory getting through shark at 10% emergence, and perhaps a merger doing a better job on it. It's just what you've seen on the farm this year and last year.
Yeah, I would say Emerger seems to have given us a bit of an advantage with fumitory. Fumitory's a bit of a sporadic weed for us, really, so it tends to be geographically just problematic here and there. It can be quite an issue for us in bulb onions as well, and Emerger certainly given us some assistance there. So I would say overall, I would say Emerger has certainly helped with fumitory for sure.
And well, we've got you in the hot seat, Mike. You mentioned in your video about where need be you have to follow up with a post-emergence spray. Have you needed to do that this year, and how have things gone in general on the farm?
Yes, I suppose the same as most people have experienced, is generally weed control has been more difficult. Predominantly, probably really the dry conditions have meant that residual herbicides have been far less effective than you would have hoped for in a normal season. We've had to go with rimsulfuron in a few specific problem areas, and that's given us reasonable results. But I think the other thing to remember as well is, just we re-ridge a lot, so we've used re-ridging as a strategy in certain places, and we're re-ridging sometimes to try and bring soil back up in the profile and to tackle issues such as greening, but also because we're growing on multi-row configuration, so 3 rows and a 2-inch bed, then crop competition from salad or seed varieties is quite rapid. You're getting more rapid achievement of ground cover, which can play quite a significant part in weed control as well.
Perfect. And then I promise I will stop picking on you shortly, Mike, but just if I put up on screen the summary of this year's demonstrations. I know we whizzed through them. You'll have been in that field multiple times every week. I was surprised that there wasn't as much phytotoxic damage as we've seen in previous years, but it's definitely knocked the crop back. What are your observations from being in that field regularly?
Yeah, just that really. As you say, a little bit surprised you haven't seen as much actual sort of phytotoxic symptoms. So in terms of sort of crop yellowing and foliage yellowing or distortion, that sort of thing, but more just in terms of actual development. So, canopy height and canopy ground cover levels have been pushed quite well back really, and that's been mirrored by what's happened underground in terms of tube development as well. So it's really it's really shown that those later applications are quite damaging in terms of crop development, and that's a very light sandy loam. It's been under quite a bit of moisture stress and heat stress at certain points of the season. That's probably really exacerbated the effects as well.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. Now I have another question here for I suppose actually one for Joe and Harry to some extent. That with the shift to the drier springs we've been seeing, and the effect that has an activation of residuals being key to any sort of efficacy we get from these, what can we do to mitigate that risk? Irrigation is one option, and also there's a cost to that, Harry, and a workload capacity. But is stacking actives and just shifting away from short half-life products the better option, Joe? It's a 2-part question.
It's a difficult one, isn't it? I mean, the dry, if you have a very dry year when you're trying to put on a residual chemistry, then the potential for not getting good efficacy with it does increase. So it is I agree, a difficult one to do. And stacking actives, and so going on with if your residual isn't going to give you the control, then you do need to go in with a post stem, don't you? So, which I think Mike, you said you'd done with rimsulfuron in some of your fields.
Yes, that's right.
It has to be you know, it's a case by case situation, isn't it? And one size ain't going to fit all.
And then to Harry from there, I don't know, obviously, but irrigation costs and capacity, that's not always been another option, and that's just going to add more cost onto an already costly crop to grow, to irrigate for weed control.
I think so, yeah. Like Joe says, it's a case by case thing. Is it the norm that we get a much drier spring? We'll be saying something different in 12 months' time, I'm sure. So yeah, as I say, it's you have to manage the situation that you have, I guess. And if it's irrigation is a risk, it cuts your spraying window. But if it's necessary, then yeah, perhaps it is.
And so, Joe, now you're back. Is there anything you would like to cover back from your slides, or were you virtually towards the end of it?
I think I was probably towards the end. Did the robot at the end? Did you get that one from me? So I know in terms of in Australia, there's a NIO technology. I've developed a robot called Oz that has the ability to, with spiked arrows, can carry out weed control in potatoes. So we're sort of keeping an eye on that sort of technology to see how quickly it's developing. So yeah, so it's things potential for the future that hopefully will come through.
So a question on that last presentation, Joe. So with the iSpot system and a sequence of 3 applications of glyphosate, is that not going against the WRAG advice and likely going to lead to glyphosate resistance with that sort of setup?
Yes, because so RAG do advise 2 currently, don't they? So yeah, I can see that. It's quite a different system in terms of application and the rate and how it's done. It's very small droplets of products that are applied to each individual weed. So, but yeah, certainly, I think at the moment it's still in development phase, and they need to consider all those sorts of approaches. So yeah.
Perfect. And then back to you, Mike. Have you seen any flushes of weeds following re-ridging? The person's question assumes it's largely stone-free land, and their concern is down in Cornwall, you'd be pushing stone into the ridge and get successive flushes from soil disturbance.
Successive flushes don't tend to be too much of a problem. Yeah, certainly have to be cautious as to how much work you're doing, how much soil you're moving in the wheelings, where the stone windrows are. So the majority of what we're trying to do is really moving soil from the centre outwards and pushing soil up on the outside of the ridges, but certainly keeping anything out from digging into that wheeling to bring stone up. Generally, if you're timing it, we found that if we time it at the point at which canopy cover is getting towards 80–90%, then generally the crop competition is doing a lot in terms of shading out, competing out any successive flushes. Fat end can be an issue sometimes, but that aside, generally not too bad.
Perfect. And then another one for you, Joe. It's more of a question, a statement about Belgium now have formal approval for the use of mineral oils, so phase 2, etc. When using tank mixture with Gozai and in tank mixture with Ranman Top to improve desiccation. Is that something that's on the radar? Obviously, we have our ongoing national desiccation trials that we have at Spot East, Spot North, Spot West and Spot Scotland, where we'll be looking at alternates to dicot desiccation.
Yeah, it was something that we would last year when we ran the desiccation trials. We included Ranman Top within the treatments, obviously to maintain good blight control. And yeah, so that we had quite a lot of discussion with Belgium in terms of rates and how much, and so it's good that there is that formal approval now. Perfect.
Another question coming in that we'll actually come on to later in our series of webinars about best practice for MH application. I thought with is MH at risk of going? I know within AHDB we have our at-risk list that's regularly reviewed. As far as I'm aware, there's nothing imminent on MH, but obviously best practice is still to be adhered to, and we will be continuing with trials how to get the maximum efficacy out of that product. See, you're nodding there, Joe.
Yeah, no, that's good, and yeah, I'm not aware of anything at the moment in terms of that. So yeah.
And then Mike, from a sort of a season point of view for you, how are crops looking on the Suffolk coast in general, compared to a normal season, if there is such a thing?
Well, I think early crops that we've been harvesting to date have actually been quite reasonable so far. Tuber numbers on the early salad crops have been quite good, probably slightly above average, and quality so far has been okay. I think my concerns really are for some of the more mid-season and late-season crops where we had even greater irrigation pressure around scab control timings, and we're starting to see some common scab on some of our crops, some flecks here and there. So I think that'll be a bit of a challenge. So yeah, water's been the biggest challenge so far really over the last few weeks, and we've had a couple of little episodes of rainfall which have certainly helped ease things a little bit, but predominantly it's been pretty hot and dry. So that'll be the biggest challenge. Seed crops on unirrigated land, we'll have to see. At the moment they're pretty stressed, so we'll see how they fare in terms of tuber numbers and whether they start to reabsorb tubers over the next few weeks, but they're still at a pretty critical stage. So yeah, if you guys who are getting thunderstorms would like to send them this way, that'd be gratefully received, I'm sure.
You're feeling a bit left out on the Suffolk coast there.
Definitely.
Obviously, you mentioned re-ridging at times. Questions coming in about when you put your preems on with regards to re-ridging, so before or after the seal down spray. I'm assuming you would normally a mechanical re-ridging would be done as a last resort, if you like. So you put a seal down spray and then follow up with mechanical where needed, or would you do it the other way around?
No. So yeah, herbicides going on, obviously pre-emergence for residual products and very close to emergence for contacts, and then yeah, re-ridging is really happening at the point at which canopy is getting close to sort of 80-90% ground cover. So yeah, generally at that point we're then relying on crop competition to to mitigate any subsequent weed growth or any subsequent weed flushes, to be honest.
Perfect. And then a question for you, Harry, that's come in. It was asking around forward speed of travel with regards to applying herbicides, and it says is time over target key when you have increased workload over reduced time with dicot having gone?
Yeah. If you're going to get the best efficacy, it's 14k is the top speed, and I know modern sprayers can do 16-18k with relative ease these days. But it's the nozzle and it's the nozzle that's the limiting thing. So yeah, it's just longer time in the seat, I'm afraid. Even when it's when you're up against it, it's people say you can get as good efficacy from doing 16-18 kilometers an hour down the field, but it's potentially, yes, one way. If there's a breeze, if it's coming back the other way, then it could be disrupted, so you could be limiting your efficacy in that way. So yeah, I'm afraid, yeah, it's 12 to 14k is the limit, really.
And then to put a real farm scenario on that, Mike, how, I know you mentioned the video, but how have you found it this year, the first spring without dicot, and then having a 30% less emergence window for targeting crops and capacity, etc.?
Yeah, it's obviously been a bit more challenging. It's added some extra workload into the spraying side of the business. So yeah, we've been fortunate, and generally we haven't had conditions that have stopped us from spraying from a moisture point of view. It's not never been too wet to get on the spray. Wind can be a bit of an issue, but we're fortunate we've got quite a committed spray team who are happy to come in odd times of the day and night to get the job done. But yeah, I'd echo Harry's comments really, and it's better to set to and to do the job at 12 to 14k rather than to rush through it. I think the other thing that's guided us a little bit probably has been, if we earlier in the season, if we have had soil moisture around, we've perhaps got on and applied residual applications when the moisture's been there, when it perhaps would have been, historically, that would have been a bit early to make that application. But I think if there's moisture around, it's certainly worth getting on and making that application of those products then. But yeah, it has pushed us a little bit in terms of spray workloads, for sure.
And a question for you, Joe. Sort of looking forward, after you've shown us some of the pipeline of stuff, is the new norm going to be probably less solutions in a can and more integrated solutions, or are there products in the pipeline with manufacturers that we'll be seeing shortly?
I think it is going to be more of an integrated solution, and yeah, we're not seeing huge numbers of products coming through the system, and certainly things like precision application are going to be more key going forward, I think.
Perfect. And then a question coming now for you, Harry, throwing you into the deep end slightly, but you know, we're working on this at the moment behind the scenes, but what nozzles would AHDB recommend for herbicide application, pre-emergence and post-emergence?
Yeah, I'd say there's a lot of, it depends on your need for reduction of drift. If it's pre-emergence, then you're going to need some soil coverage. And there's a lot to be said for a standard flat fan if you want to go down that route. Potentially, if you're air induction, then Guardian Air is a very good nozzle to do that as well. For post emergence, then a twin cap nozzle can get you some very good coverage with a 200 litre water rate.
And then it's with the same question to you, Mike. Are you happy to share what your farm standard practice would be?
Yeah, so lots of pressure now in terms of nozzle choice moving to drift reduction. So generally preams with TTTI nozzles, so an air induction, and then for post-am applications, we've generally gone down the twin cap route, so something like a Leckler IDTA 05 for 200 litres per hectare. But yeah, it's something we review quite a bit, to be fair, and we do try to use water sensitive paper and try and make assessments, and we're doing the same on some of our other crops, bulb onions in particular, herbicides in those that are quite challenging in terms of application technology.
Perfect. A question that's come in, and I'll answer was a question around, well, you can maybe interject as well, Joe, that are there any products to aid potato storage with the loss of CIPC other than MH that can be applied pre-desiccation? Not that I can think of that any have direct influence on it, but say we've got some subsequent webinars I'll provide the information for after this about what is coming up going forward, but I don't think there's anything off the top of my head.
No, I can't think of anything, certainly not that you apply in crop.
Yeah, perfect. Well, I think that's a good time to skip forward to where we are now. So I'd like to thank all our panelists very much for their contribution. Joe Martin for a good insight into the problems we're facing. Mike Shapland for being so honest about what they're doing on the farm and showing the trial. Our virtual Graham Tomalin for running us through what's happening. I say we will continue to monitor that through the season and get results for later in the season with yield and quality and tuber shape and everything information. Harry Henderson for a good insight into best practice application. There will be a short survey will be sent out following this webinar. I appreciate it's very sort of unprecedented times. We would far rather be stood in a field in East Suffolk, hopefully not getting soaked by a thunder. Well, we wouldn't be. From what Mike said, it's dry over there. It's often better to do these things in person. There are some 3 handouts, as mentioned, on the panel at the side. So if you want any information today, please take them. We appreciate any feedback you get, so you take a minute just to fill it in. That would be great. This webinar has been recorded, so you can catch up on it in a later date. If you have any questions, that's my details there, and my Twitter handle. You'll be very disappointed if you go there as there's no tweets. I still need to sort of get my head around that one just now. But this is the beginning of a long summer of events. We had one first potato webinar last week on the storage one, and we have another one on the 23rd of June, similar times at 3:30, which is post-CIPC sprout control, focusing on the processing market. AHDB, we do appreciate that it's not one shoe fits all. People have different requirements for their end customer, so that's very much focusing on processing market and alternates for CIPC for that one. A week later, on the 30th of June, we have one for the fresh market, and then the second week of July, the 6th to the 9th, we're going to have an AHDB Potato Showcase week, when we're going to cover all things from the business side, some of the market information, some of the research that's going on within the potato sector, funded by AHDB. Hopefully have a look into some of the technology that's being used, where that fits and how it can be done, and then a roundup with some more of the spot farm trials around the country. So yeah, without further ado, I'd like to thank all our speakers very much today, everyone who joined us, and hope it was worth your while attending. So until next time, thank you very much.
Thank you.